What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of The Breakdown. Today, I got my friend Dani with me. How are you, Dani?
Hey, what's up?
You doing good?
Yeah, doing well.
So Dani and her husband, Theo, which you cannot see, but is right over here, just moved here from California, living right down the street from us. So we've officially roped them into all things we do online here. So, all right, Dani, today we continued our sermon series on the Atonement. Today, the title, I'm getting stumbled up on words, so the title of the sermon was The Day of Atonement. And atonement simply means at one with God. So it takes this kind of big word and it makes it very simple. And pastor, man, it's such a strong word. I heard things today that I had never heard before, which tends to be like what happens on a Sunday. Like I leave, I'm like, I've never heard that before.
Right.
Somehow pastor has this way of just drudging out all this really cool truth in scripture. Anyways, but he started off with one passage in James 2:10 that says, whoever keeps the entire law yet stumbles at one point is guilty of breaking it all. And what I love is that this is like a bad news, good news type message where the reality is we've all fallen in sin and fallen short of the glory of God. That's what Scripture says, Romans 3:23. But then the message ended with so much hope as we talk about what Jesus did for us. So, Dani, I'd love to hear what's something that kind of jumped out to you today.
So, I mean, for me, I was kind of thinking like how he was mentioning that God gives us these standards, like the 10 Commandments, these standards to kind of live by, just because he loves us so much. And it's a guide. Right. It's not because he's some cruel God, it says you can't do this, but it's just this guide to kind of live in one with him and be closer to him. Yeah. So he had kind of mentioned that a little bit, and I love that, and that kind of ties in with what you just read, too. Yeah,
it's so funny because sometimes we think of the 10 Commandments and these rules and these laws, and people assume that God doesn't want you to have any fun or God doesn't want you to live your life and all these things. And now that I'm a parent, I think of everything through the lens of my children. So at our house, we live pretty close to like a pretty big road, and we had to build a fenced-in backyard because if you know my boys, they are buck wild. Like it is just crazy 24/7. But what's cool is that inside of this fence, my boys may think, oh, inside this fence, we can't go outside the fence. They think they're missing out on all these things. But inside the fence, there's so much freedom and there's so much security and there's so much safety. And they can literally do whatever they want to inside the fence. Like it's there because I love them and I want what's best for them. And there's so much freedom inside of that where sometimes we think there's so much outside of that. But what we don't know is that outside of that, there's danger and there's harm and there's all these things. So when I think of the 10 Commandments and the law that God gave us, I used to think, man, God just don't want me to have any fun. And now I see that through the lens of, man, God just loves me and he wants to keep me safe.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how I felt about it. I love hearing that like story about your kids too, picturing it that way.
Now, my kids recently have been jumping the fence. I'm just like, I don't know if they're like preparing to run from the cops or something one day, but anyway, so I gotta work on that.
We'll wheel her back in.
That's a whole nother breakdown for a whole nother time. But the reality is that we're all going to mess up. And God has this standard he has set. Jesus lived this perfect life, but that's not a life that you and I can live. So that's where this whole idea of, they used to atone for sins through the sacrifice of animals. Yeah. And what about when Pastor talked about how blood and cleansing, but in reality, blood is like messy, y'all. Like blood, that was just funny to think of that imagery of how blood it was meant to cleanse us, when reality, blood is messy.
I know.
It is so incredibly messy. But Jesus came for once and for all to be that sacrifice. So, all right, Dani, what else stood out to you today? I got like so many notes here that we could talk about. Oh, this was funny. So if you haven't seen, while you're looking for this, if you haven't seen the message yet, at one point in the first service, Pastor said, you know what the most dangerous tool is in woodworking? And somebody in the crowd yelled, you! Which is so true.
That is so funny. It's like the box cutter.
Yeah,
I know, but
not the box cutter. They were saying, Pastor, you are the most dangerous one, actually.
That's hilarious.
It's so funny.
Well, one of his main points, actually, about sin and about blood being shed was when he said life is in the blood. And when God said to Adam, you will die if you eat from the tree. Yeah. And that's why God sacrificed the animal to cover the sin. Yeah. Because something has to be offered up for us because we are sinners. Without shedding of blood, sin cannot be forgiven. Yeah. So that was kind of, And I know so many like images popped up in my head during this message today.
Yeah. And then he went on to talk about the darkness. Okay. So I know this really stood out to you, so I'm going to let you talk about it a little bit. But we've read in Scripture, and I've missed what this meant so many times, where when Jesus died on the cross at noon, so you know how bright it is at noon, until 3 it went dark. And I've read that, I've known that happened, but Pastor shed some light on today, no pun intended, on why it went dark. So kind of what stood out to you there, because that was a very interesting fact there.
Okay, so maybe I think to read it first, just the death of Jesus.
That's
so
why we
we're
got Dani
in
here.
Luke 23:44 through 46. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And then when he had said this, he breathed his last.
And then it went dark.
Yeah, and then it went dark. And so the imagery to me, too, is this like darkness. And then when they put the picture up of the crosses and how it was just dark and saying that was God, like looking over his son, saying that this is okay. This is my son.
That I accept
and I accept this sacrifice. Like that. I never thought of it that way because I always thought of God in light.
Right.
I never thought of God in darkness.
Yeah.
And so when he said that, I was like, that is such an interesting, because it's this like, this, I don't know, the imagery is just crazy to me. This like, a good thing is happening within the darkness,
Wow.
and it just, I don't know. I loved it. I love that imagery.
It's
really
crazy
cool.
you said that. I think back to many dark things that have happened in my life, dark things that are currently happening in some areas. And on the backside of that, how I see God's goodness through that.
Right.
Like there are so many things that have happened in my life. I'm like, man, I wish this was not my reality right now. But on the backside, I'm like, man, God really showed up. Like I experienced God in this real tangible way. And I hadn't thought about that until you just said that. Like that darkness was God at work even in the darkness. And if you haven't seen this week's message yet, I encourage you to go back and watch it, because Pastor actually gave several other examples of when God showed up in this way, showed up in this darkness. And it was just really cool to see that tangibly. And the weight of my salvation and the weight of gratitude for what Jesus did, I don't think I've ever felt that as much as I did today in this message. Like it brought so much clarity to the magnitude of what Jesus really did for us. Well, anyways, I'm about to start crying thinking about it. All right.
I know.
Dani, you got any last thoughts here?
No, I do not. I just think of like what a selfless act and just how loved we are. And today's message is just such a reminder of that. Like, the ultimate sacrifice. That's something my husband told me. He was like, that's just what he got from it, is like the one thing of this message just to kind of like hone in on is like, he was the ultimate sacrifice for our sins.
Wow.
And,
No, that's good. All right. Well, hey, if you are watching this the week it comes out, I want to encourage you. This week we're doing something here at Long Haul called the Journey to Easter. So often it's easy for us to get through the hustle and bustle of life and miss, what the Easter season is all about. But as a church, we are traveling through what Jesus was doing every single day on his journey to Easter. So I want to encourage you, follow us on social media at Long Hollow, or you can download the app and you can see all the things we're doing with Journey to Easter there as well. All right, Dani, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next week.